We're used to walking out of an action film with a grin. The hero survives. The mission is accomplished. The credits roll over the echo of explosions and one-liners. It's a formula that audiences have come to expect, and studios are terrified to break. But not all stories were written to end that way. Before the final cuts, before test screenings and studio mandates, many of these films were meant to conclude with the hero's death, a quiet sacrifice, a brutal downfall, or a twist that left no room for triumph. These weren't just alternate endings. They were the original spine of the story, conceived by writers and directors who believed that some victories come at the highest price. Then came the boardrooms. Executives worried about box office reactions. Test audiences flinched, and one by one, these endings were softened, rewritten, or removed altogether. In some cases, the original footage was buried. In others, it never made it past a script draft or director's pitch. What remains is a ghost, the faint outline of a different film hiding behind the one we know. What would these movies feel like if they had stayed true to their original vision? Would the audience have accepted a world where the hero doesn't walk away? Let's uncover 15 action films that were never supposed to end with survival but were bent into optimism by forces off-screen. FACT. Shabak Wahid, Avenging Force, 1986 وثمانون. The bullets were meant to kill him. That was the point. In the original script of Avenging Force, Matt Hunter wasn't supposed to survive the final battle. His death was written as a noble sacrifice, one that would underscore the film's critique of systemic corruption and the cost of honor in a broken system. Released in 1986 and directed by Sam Furstenberg, the film stars Michael Dudikoff as a former Secret Service agent drawn into a deadly conflict with a neo-fascist group known as the Pentangle. It's a film drenched in paranoia and political cynicism, and its bleak tone was no accident. The story was originally designed to end with Hunter being killed, shot down after dismantling the group, his victory hollow and anonymous. But when the studio saw the ending, they balked. Dudikoff was a rising action star, and killing off his character was seen as financial suicide. The ending was reshot to have Hunter escape, battered but alive, with no trace of the earlier fatalism. The final cut feels abrupt, unresolved because it is. No footage of the original death scene has surfaced. It exists only in early script drafts and whispers from the crew. Would the film have become a cult classic sooner if it had dared to kill its hero? Fact #2. The Peacekeeper, 1997. He was supposed to die saving the world. The Peacekeeper, released in 1997, stars Dolph Lundgren as Air Force Major Frank Cross, tasked with stopping nuclear devastation after a rogue general hijacks U.S. missile codes. It's a standard 90 seconds thriller with explosions, betrayals, and patriotic overtures, but its original ending wasn't nearly so celebratory. The script's final act had Cross sacrificing himself to prevent a missile launch, choosing death over compromise. It was gritty, ambiguous, and leaned into the Cold War paranoia still lingering in the post-Soviet world. Lundgren reportedly supported the ending, seeing it as a rare opportunity for emotional weight in an otherwise formulaic genre. But test screenings didn't go well. Audiences wanted Cross to win, not die. The studio reacted fast, reshooting the climax so that Cross escapes at the last second, triumphant and intact. The new ending defangs the narrative. Instead of consequence, it delivers closure. The original footage has never been released. Just like the missile that never launched, the darker ending was silenced before it could do damage. Fact Shabak Thalatha. Shakedown. 1988. The law was never meant to win. In Shakedown, Peter Weller plays an overworked public defender who uncovers a web of corruption within the NYPD. The film is a slick hybrid of courtroom drama and street-level action, released in 1988 and directed by James Glickenhaus. But its original ending wasn't about justice prevailing, it was about justice failing. Early drafts had Weller's character lose the case. The system crushes him. The corrupt cops walk free, and the final shot is him alone, broken on the courthouse steps. It was a nihilistic ending that matched the film's cynical undertone. But that version tested poorly. Studio heads pushed for a more satisfying resolution. The rewritten ending sees the protagonist pulling off a last-minute legal victory and walking away victorious, an outcome that feels almost too clean for a film steeped in institutional rot. Glickenhaus later admitted that he preferred the original, but compromise came with the budget. Did the film lose its edge the moment it found a happy ending? Fact hash 4. The challenge, 1982. There are 2 endings to the challenge, but only one was allowed to survive. Directed by John Frankenheimer, this 1982 film pits an American boxer, Scott Glenn, against a feuding Japanese clan locked in a samurai-era ideological war. The film's Eastern and Western versions offer starkly different conclusions because the hero's fate wasn't universally acceptable. In the Japanese version, the story ends with a somber duel and the protagonist succumbing to wounds, his death treated as a spiritual reconciliation with the culture he never truly belonged to. It's a tragic yet poetic finale, aligning with the film's themes of honor and identity. But when the film was slated for American release, the distributors deemed the ending too fatalistic. The U.S. version was re-edited. The same duel concludes with Glenn's character limping away victorious, the narrative reframed as a tale of survival and triumph. The tonal shift is jarring. What was once a tragedy of dislocation became a victory lap. 2 markets, 2 messages. One character split in 2. Fact? Death before dishonor. 1987. His death was written in ink. The studio erased it. In Death Before Dishonor, Gunnery Sergeant Burns, played by Fred Dreyer, leads a rogue mission to rescue American hostages from Middle Eastern militants. It's a flag-waving, Reagan-era action film, released in 1987. But buried deep in the script's early pages is a very different finale. The original ending had Burns refusing evacuation, staying behind to cover his team's retreat. The final explosion takes him with it. It was a raw, sacrificial ending, one that aligned with the film's title and military ethos. Director Terry Leonard reportedly fought to keep it, citing its emotional resonance and thematic payoff. But the studio disagreed. They insisted Burns live not for narrative reasons, but for potential franchising. A sequel couldn't happen with a dead hero. The ending was rewritten, reshot, and rebranded. Burns survives, limping into the sunset, surrounded by victorious comrades. No deleted scene of his death has ever emerged. But the title now rings hollow, echoing a sacrifice never shown. Fact. 6. Cobra 1986. The original ending was bloodier. Directed by George P. Cosmatos and starring Sylvester Stallone, Cobra 1986 is a gritty, neon-soaked tale of a rogue cop taking down a cult of murderers. But behind its pulpy violence and synth-heavy aesthetic lies a production rife with conflict and a final act that never saw daylight. Early edits of the film included an ending where Marion Cobretti dies during the final confrontation, taking the villain with him in a brutal, mutually assured destruction. It was a bold conclusion, meant to cement his mythos as a martyr, half legend, half ghost. Stallone himself reportedly entertained the idea, wanting something more iconic than survival. But test audiences and executives weren't sold. Stallone was at the height of his box office power. Killing off Cobra wasn't just controversial, it was commercially insane. The ending was softened, the violence trimmed, and Cobretti walks away, smirking into the California sunlight. Ironically, that safe ending did little to save the film's reception. Would a darker ending have pushed Cobra into cult territory sooner? Fact 7. Passenger 7 etu sinne og 992. The plane was always going down. In the earliest drafts of Passenger 57, Wesley Snipes' character John Cutter was never meant to walk away. The original plan was bold. The hero foils the terrorists, saves the passengers, but dies in the crash. A redemption arc paid with finality. It wasn't about survival. It was about closure. But by the time the film landed in theaters in 1992, the tone had shifted. With Snipes on the rise as a charismatic action lead, killing off his character was off the table. Producers feared damaging his marketability in future roles and franchises. The ending was rewritten. Cutter survives, quips intact, and strides into the closing credits with effortless cool. Interestingly, traces of the original plan still linger in the film's tone moments of fatalism, close-ups that suggest finality, but they're never paid off. The death was filmed, then shelved. No one speaks of that version, but somewhere, on some hard drive, a different ending waits to be rediscovered. FACT, Bard, Target, 1993. John Woo wanted blood. He got edits. Hard Target marked John Woo's American debut, bringing his signature slow-motion shootouts and operatic violence to the U.S. mainstream. Starring Jean-Claude Van Damme as a drifter caught in a deadly hunt, the film was released in 1993 with a relatively tame ending by Woo's standards. Originally, the film concluded with a much darker twist. Van Damme's character dies after exposing the underground hunting ring, his body riddled with bullets as fire engulfs the warehouse. It was stylized, symbolic, and perfectly in line with Woo's Hong Kong oeuvre, where heroes often die in flashes of glory. But the MPAA balked. The studio demanded reshoots, rewrites, and over 40 cuts to tone down the violence and reverse the ending. The result? A PG-13 friendly conclusion where the hero survives with little emotional weight. Bootleg versions of the director's cut exist grainy, incomplete, and brutal. Was American cinema just not ready for Woo's brand of tragedy? Fact #9, The Last Boy Scout, 1991. It wasn't supposed to be a happy ending. Shane Black's original script for The Last Boy Scout was a dark, bitter pill far bleaker than the buddy cop romp that hit theaters in 1991. Bruce Willis's character, Joe Hallenbeck, was originally meant to die in the climax, sacrificing himself to stop a corrupt politician's assassination plot. His death wasn't just symbolic, it was the only moral resolution in a story where every institution was rotten. But Warner Brothers had other plans. After a tumultuous shoot and clashes between producers and director Tony Scott, the studio demanded rewrites to lighten the tone. Joe survives. He cracks a joke. The final scene plays like a sitcom freeze frame. Shane Black later distanced himself from the final product. His darker themes had been sanitized. The hard edge was gone. And yet, if Hallenbeck had died, would the film have been forgotten or immortalized as something far more subversive? Fact #11, Red Scorpion, 1988. Revolutionaries aren't supposed to get happy endings. Red Scorpion, released in 1988, cast Dolph Lundgren as a Soviet Special Forces agent who defects after witnessing atrocities in an African conflict zone. The film leaned heavily into Cold War propaganda, but behind its jingoistic surface lay a much bleaker intent. In its earliest incarnation, the screenplay closed with Lundgren's character sacrificing himself to stop a weapons shipment, dying in an explosion as tribal fighters look on in silence. It was a symbolic death, atonement, not glory. But producers tied to American backers pushed back. The Cold War was thawing, and they wanted a hero image to close on. The ending was reworked. The explosion happens, but Lundgren survives, conveniently tossed from the blast like a Marvel character. Cue triumphant music and a sunset shot. There are storyboards of the death scene, even production stills that suggest it was at least partially filmed. But the cut we got was all about survival, not consequence. Fact #11, Stone Cold, 1991. It ended with a funeral. Until it didn't. In Stone Cold, ex-football player Brian Bosworth plays an undercover cop infiltrating a violent biker gang. The film is loud, aggressive, and unapologetically over the top. But somewhere beneath the leather and firepower was a script that dared to end on a note of fatalism. The original third act had Bosworth's character exposed and killed during the climactic standoff. The gang escapes. Justice doesn't prevail. It was a brutal twist meant to comment on the cost of deep cover operations and the thin line between law and chaos. Test audiences were stunned and not in a good way. The studio pulled the plug on that ending immediately. A new one was hastily shot. Bosworth survives, defeats the gang leader in a public shootout, and walks away with stoic cool. Rumors persist that the original ending was filmed but never edited. No footage has surfaced. But if it had, Stone Cold might have become a very different kind of cult classic. Fact شباك واحد اثنان. Bulletproof. 1988. Some endings are so dark, they're buried alive. Bulletproof, not to be confused with the 1996 buddy comedy, is a 1988 low-budget action film starring Gary Busey as a rogue special ops agent battling terrorists with a hijacked supertank. It's pulpy, messy, and deeply of its era, but the original ending hinted at something far more serious. The script called for Busey's character to detonate the tank from the inside, destroying himself and the weapon to prevent its misuse. A hero's death in the most literal sense. It gave the film a gravity that no one expected from the rest of its tone. But the studio stepped in, citing commercial tone mismatch. A new ending was shot where the hero survives, salutes, and delivers a one-liner over the wreckage. The entire message of responsibility and sacrifice was wiped clean in favor of macho theatrics. The original ending exists only in draft form pages that never made it to screen. Sometimes, the bravest scenes are the ones no one gets to see. Fact Hasson 3. The Punisher. 1989. He was never meant to find peace. The 1989 adaptation of The Punisher, starring Dolph Lundgren, aimed to bring Marvel's darkest anti-hero to screen but with one foot still planted in studio hesitation. While the film kept the violence and moral ambiguity, it stopped short of delivering the original conclusion. In early drafts, Frank Castle doesn't walk away. After dismantling the crime syndicate, he turns the gun on himself in a final act of grief and rage. It's a faithful echo of the comic's grimmest arcs, where vengeance devours what little humanity Castle has left. But that ending was deemed too bleak for a mainstream audience, especially for a film already pushing the boundaries of brutality. The studio demanded changes. Castle survives. He delivers a monologue. The camera lingers on his hollow stare. But there's no blood on the floor. It's a compromise that left both fans and filmmakers divided. Would The Punisher have earned more respect had it ended with the sound of one last bullet? Fact Hasson 4. The Glimmer Man. 1996. Some heroes were never built to survive. Steven Seagal's The Glimmer Man was always meant to be an outlier, a spiritual, almost supernatural thriller wrapped in action tropes. In the early version of the film, his character, Jack Cole, dies during the final confrontation, saving his estranged family from a hidden enemy within the police force. It was a rare attempt to inject vulnerability into Seagal's near-mythic on-screen persona. Cole's death was written as a form of redemption, closing the book on a violent past through personal sacrifice. But Seagal refused, not just as an actor but as a producer. He reportedly rejected any ending where his character dies, claiming, "Heroes don't fall." The studio caved, and the ending was altered. Cole defeats the villain, reunites with his family, and walks away untouched, unscarred, almost divine. The original concept exists only in early story treatments. What happens when an actor rewrites fate and the audience never knows what they missed? Fact Hasson 5. Marked for Death. 1990. He was supposed to go down with the enemy. In Marked for Death, Steven Seagal plays an ex-DEA agent battling a Jamaican drug cartel steeped in mysticism and violence. The film is explosive, stylized, and drenched in early 90 seconds genre confidence. But its original ending was far more brutal and far more final. The first cut had Seagal's character mortally wounded after defeating the villain, dying in the arms of his family. It was meant to close the loop on a life of violence, delivering a rare moment of emotional resonance in Seagal's filmography. Director Dwight H. Little supported the ending, seeing it as a necessary cost for the carnage unleashed. But again, Seagal intervened. He was being positioned as an untouchable brand. Death, even in fiction, didn't fit the image. The ending was rewritten, the fatal wound removed, and the final shot was restructured to show him walking off as if nothing happened. The idea of consequence was sacrificed to maintain the illusion of invincibility. And with it, the story lost the one thing that could have made it human. Bonus fact. Komando 1985. He was meant to die a legend, not live to see the sequel. Before Commando became a one-liner machine and a quintessential Arnold Schwarzenegger vehicle, it was something else entirely. In its earliest form, the story of John Matrix wasn't about survival, it was about sacrifice. The first draft, penned before Schwarzenegger was even attached, ended with Matrix dying in the final assault, detonating himself alongside the mercenaries to protect his daughter. It was meant to elevate him beyond a soldier into a myth. The explosion, the silence, the unresolved grief, it would have been a cinematic exclamation mark in a genre too often afraid of periods. But when Schwarzenegger came on board, everything changed. Producers saw franchise potential. Studios saw box office. The ending was rewritten to let Matrix live, smile, and walk into the sunset with his daughter and a new love interest. The final line? No chance. A wink to the audience that this was just the beginning. Ironically, Commando never received a sequel despite being engineered to launch one. So the ending changed, but the franchise never materialized. A death sacrificed for a future that never came. What makes a hero truly unforgettable? His survival or his sacrifice? As we've seen, some of the most powerful endings in action cinema were rewritten, buried, or completely erased, often for reasons far removed from storytelling. But what if those original conclusions had been allowed to breathe? Would these films be remembered differently? Would they hit harder? Tell us which of these lost endings should have been kept. And more importantly, why do you think they were changed?